It is common knowledge that printer ink is crazy expensive, especially when you can buy off-brand ink for a fifth of the cost of it brand new from the manufacturer. Add on top of that is some of the companies have added in protection into their cartridges and printers, preventing you from using anything but their own uh, original equipment type. Now, the government is coming to the rescue, but let me tell you a little bit about that. Several years ago, a neighbor of mine was a retired engineer for one of the big printer companies. And he told me the story that as a young engineer, he worked for a large format printing company. And they're the type that make blueprints and things like that. And they were bought up by one of the common big name printer companies, primarily to get access to the engineers and to get a patent on some software that they've been playing around with that basically was the forefather of the protection uh, software that we have in the printers today, preventing us from using the different cartridges and such. So we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later on, what the government has done for us and how you can get around some of those protections. So what do you do when you need to have some ink and hopefully you planned ahead and so you don't have to like panic and go to the closest place that can get it for you, which usually there's a premium then. But primarily, one of the cheapest ways that you can securely get good printer ink is to have the cartridge that just ran out refilled at a reliable company. Costco used to do this. They no longer do it in my area. Some of the drugstores do this. And of course, you could do this yourself, and we'll go into that a little bit later on. One of the benefits is that usually the capacity they will give you is more than what the original capacity was. So it's kind of a better bargain. And again, it's for about one fifth of the price it would take to go ahead and buy a new one. And typically, since it has the chip in there, your printer will recognize it. Sometimes it'll recognize it as empty still. And one of the ways that you can fix that is basically power off your printer for a period of time and then do a hard boot and restart it. Uh, and it'll recognize your printer, your cartridge is brand new. Sometimes you have to take another cartridge, put it in there, have it say, "Oh, this is no good," turn it off, then put your new cartridge that you had refilled, put in there, and it'll start all from brand new again. Similar to that is you can buy a cartridge in several places that's been remanufactured. Essentially, somebody has turned in their original equipment cartridge, refilled it, and they've sold it to you. And that's usually a little bit more than what it would take for you to have it refilled at one of these places. Nice thing about having your cartridges refilled and remanufactured is the environmental costs. The landfills are just filled with these cartridges, especially if they can't be reused. And most people just don't take the time to try to do that method and just throw them away. This has become such a big problem as the printer companies are getting little bonus points by giving you a little return mailer that you can send the cartridge back to them. And what they do with it, I'm not really sure. I don't know if they'll provide them to remanufacturers because that would be kind of against their purpose of trying to sell you a brand new one from them for 5 times more. The next thing that you can try is buy a non original equipment cartridge. And this is basically in the category of a compatible cartridge. It's made by another company that has no ties to the manufacturer. They've just essentially copied it, made a couple changes so there isn't a patent infringement, and sometimes there'll be the chip in there, and sometimes not. Usually, the best way to ensure value here is get to a good company that will offer a return policy. I've had the opportunity where whatever I did, and I've done a lot of different things we can go over later. The computer just would not. I mean, the printer would not recognize that, and they just returned it and gave me another version of it. It had different stickers on it, and they just took a chance on it. And the next one did work out pretty well. So oftentimes, buying from a company with a good reputation, you can get a compatible printer cartridge that will work just fine. Usually with more capacity than what the original cartridge had, because ink is very small part of the cost, so they can be generous with that. The next thing that you can try, and these kits are made for almost all the printers out there, is to get a ink tank. And this is something, depending on the model, it either sits next to your printer or inside it somewhere, and has little piping into the little reservoirs, and you can pour in bulk ink, and it will uh, give you the value of having it bought at such a high capacity. And again, this is like probably 10 cents on the dollar as far as ink, but you do have to buy the kit and install it. From what I've seen, from the stores I've seen, installation is pretty easy. The, the next thing that you might want to consider is using a laser printer. A laser printer uses toner just like your quote unquote, here's air quotes here, the Xerox machines or photocopiers. And they sometimes the cartridge actually has the printer component in there. It's a selenium drum, and sometimes it's just a toner that goes to the selenium drum that's in your printer. Uh, even the even the original equipment manufacturers cartridges are a lot cheaper and to produce a printed page than inkjet, and so buying it from a remanufacturing company is so much cheaper. I used to use a company that would literally come to me and they would pick up 4 or 5 of my cartridges and leave off 4 or 5, give me a credit, kind of like when you replace a battery, you get a core charge. And it was so much cheaper, and the quality was there. And of course, they considered their service to be their biggest asset to delivering it to you. So if you had any problems at all, they were just Johnny on the spot to help fix it for you. In fact, one of the companies told me that whenever I wanted to sell my laser printer, they would take it and pay me a little something for it, because the old laser printers were workhorses. You could be rebuilt them, and a lot of companies really like to have them. I have a LaserJet 3100 that I'm still using to this day, and it truly is a workhorse. They built them almost at a commercial stature at that time versus the consumer models that we have now. Now, one of the things that I want to add on when I talked about all the options that we just gave you is that you can refill your cartridges yourself. It looks daunting, but it isn't. If you have a little bit of caution, it is not messy. You can make some mistakes and it can be messy. So these kits are often available to buy for $10 or less, and they'll refill your cartridges 5 times. So you figure that out, what your labor is worth versus buying either remanufactured cartridges or compatible cartridges or the original equipment cartridges. The other thing is talking about the software that's going on right now. And one of the big companies is dancing around trying to stay within the law, because the law recently has changed to where these printer companies cannot forbid you from using non-original equipment ink. It will not void your warranty if you use it. You may not have a good user experience, is what the printer companies try to protect you from. But they are starting to put in other types of protections that are almost laughable, because you can go into the computer settings or into the settings on your computer for your printers and just switch off. And one of the companies uses the terminology is called cartridge protection setting. And essentially it's there to protect that you get the best experience by using their cartridges and nobody else's. But you can switch that off and take your chances. Another way that you can protect yourself from this is using some older printers. Most people have printers that they did not use very often, And so by buying one that's 10 or 15 years old, it may have only had a few hundred pages on it. And these older ones do not have chip recognition circuitry in there. So you can put anything you want in there. Now, they're not going to have all the bells and whistles, but they're also not going to have the problem that some of the newer ones is you run out of ink and then nothing else works. Your scanner doesn't work, your fax machine doesn't work. Things that have nothing to do with the printer ink suddenly stop working. So a way around a lot of that usually is doing a hard reset. There's other videos out there that can go into it. I might produce one a little bit later on. It's so much different for each printer, so it's best that you go ahead and search for your own printer model. But essentially it boils down is to unplugging it and allowing the memory circuit for your settings in your printer just to kind of die back when the capacitors die back, not providing a charge, and it no longer has a memory. And so you're starting from scratch. Unfortunately, when you do a really hard reboot like that, you have to do some other resettings, like some of your favorite ways that you like doing duplexing and fax numbers and things like that. It really depends on your printer. So I hope this was helpful. There are options for you not have to pay an arm and a leg to get your printer ink. And with a little bit of your own elbow grease, it can be almost free. So go ahead and put your questions in the comment section below. Please remember to subscribe and share this video to help disabled animals with donated wheelchairs.